Now here's a short presentation on understanding bonds, and I'm going to go through here in a moment the who, the why, and the what of bond. Now I have many videos on bonds. I want to keep this one simple. I'm going to run this in a three-part series. Part 1 is just identifying parts of the bond. Now Part 2 and 3 I'm going to do the major calculations using only Excel and a web app that you can use for your phone or found on the web. At FN Calculator. It's a little app for your phone. I'm going to do all the calculations with this application. Now first of all, let's look at who issues bonds. Where bonds are generally issued by organizations or government entities such as local, state, or federal governments, and they issue these bonds to raise cash to either, if they're a government entity, to provide services for their citizens, or if it's a large organization, in order to raise cash to purchase assets to drive revenues. Now, what is a bond? Well, generally we can find bonds on the permanent equation known as the balance sheet here as long-term liabilities. Now, one of the easiest way to understand what a bond is just draw its parts out. And I'm going to start with a basic time value of money timeline, and I'm going to place PV here, and I'm going to place the FV here. And of course, PV stands for present value and FV is future value. And generally, this is in a bond referred to as your face, or sometimes called the par value. In this case, it's equal to, we'll make it $1,000. Now, since it's debt, it has a date in which it will mature. This maturity date has a time limit. I'm going to say it's a number of periods of time. Excel would refer to that as N per. Most of your calculators would just have the N. And you could be careful, this period here, generally most bonds are semi-annual, so you'd have to double the number of years because semi-annual would be twice a year. We're going to do both an annual and semi-annual bond. The next part we have to determine is the rate. Now the rate is the sometimes referred to as the coupon payment. It's called a coupon. It used to be a book that you'd rip the payment out of, kind of like you would with a car. So it's called the coupon payment. This rate is fixed, therefore that's why we sometimes refer to as bonds as a fixed income instrument. And the way we determine the rate, there's a little equation. I'm going to go into I have other videos on that, but there's a method by which we determine the rate. And now these rates do change daily. What I've written on this picture here won't. So once the bond has been set, this rate does not change, or it would be fixed. Now, if I take that rate and I multiply, and I'll use this for the rate sign, and I multiply that by the face or the par value, which is 1,000, I get the amount of the payment. And now if we take a look, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 parts of our timeline. So we have all the parts. So when we're determining the calculations we need with a bond, we have to keep in mind these 5 parts. Now, this is where it gets tricky with a bond. A bond never changed, and we'll pretend like this line right here in the middle is $1,000. So I'm going to put 1,000 right here. We have to remember that a bond has the potential to change in value since the rates change. A bond can be listed as a premium bond or a discount bond. That price will change or fluctuate. I'm trying to make my fluctuations smaller and smaller because they get smaller and smaller as we get close to our maturity date. Now, if the bond was trading up here, we refer to it as a premium bond. And if it's down here, we refer to it as a discount bond. Now, if you look at this just closely, and just imagine this. If you bought an asset for $1,000 and sold it for $1,000, you made nothing. The only thing you made was the interest payments per year. So if this rate was 10%, you'd made $100 each year, or $50 every 6 months, and you received nothing from the capital part, which in essence there's your fixed income. Now, if you purchased this bond up here at a premium and held it, watch what the bond does. The bond has to devalue itself. So anytime you buy the bond at a premium, you're going to lose some of the overall value of the bond. Therefore, the rate that you receive is going to be less than the rate that it was set at. using that same analogy, if you bought the bond at a discount, it's going to appreciate, and your rate is going to be at a it's going to be higher than that. Now, generally, there's only a few. Well, I'll do the first one up here. There's really only two calculations. I'm going to do one up here that I'm not going to call it a calculation. It's sometimes referred to as the current yield. Now, the current yield is nothing more than the annual price. Now, annual, so if it's semi-annual, just double it. Payment, not price, annual payment, and divide it by the current present value. The current present value. And this number here would be the current yield. Now, the two calculations that we do have to make in bonds is, number one, the present value. And if you take a look on this red line here, you'll see that sometimes it's greater than or less than 1,000. Therefore, in order to calculate the present value, we're going to have some data. We're going to have at least the payment, how many years left to maturity, of course the future value, and finally we're going to need whatever the new market rate of interest is. New market rate of interest. I'm going to write this down. New market rate of interest. And if we take those numbers, basically what we're going to do is we're going to discount these payments back, and we're going to discount this future value back over these many periods of time at that new rate. So in essence, really all you're doing is two present value calculations, your lump sum and your annuities, and then adding them up. Of course, it will be a negative number. We're going to do that with video part number 2, the second video. The second calculation we have to calculate is the number 2. Whoops. Number 2, I was trying to keep it color coordinated a little bit. Number 2 would be the, if you purchased it here and sold it here, your yield that you'd receive as an investor. This is your investor yield. Now there's two types here. You can have a yield to maturity. That means that you purchase it here, so we have a present value. We have the amount of payment. We have the future value, number of periods of time. So if we purchase there, we find that new rate, if you will. But bonds can also be called early. We'll talk about that on that video. Therefore, it's just calculating the rate. The only difference now is, let's say it was called here. You can see if it was called here, there's going to be fewer payments, and you'll find that there's going to be a slight higher amount than the future value. It's, I mean, here the par, it's going to be generally an extra coupon payment. So in this case, if this rate was 10%, it'd be $100 on top of the $10,000 or the $1,000. So generally, these are the only two calculations we have to make for bonds. So I hope this helps a little bit clarify what is a bond, who issues bond, and why they issue bond. We'll let the next video explain how to do the present value and the yields on a outstanding bond.